This is Raul Lopez, and you're listening to How Do You Say Success in Spanglish? The path to success isn't easy. For minorities and people of color, many attempt this journey with little to no guidance. Join me as I sit down with individuals who share their stories of perseverance so that together we can learn how to say success in Spanglish. What's good, mi gente? Welcome back to How Do You Say Success in Spanglish? It's your boy Raul. Thanks for joining me. Today, our guest is Michael Martinez. How's it going, Michael?
What's going on, brother? How you doing?
Good, man. Thank you so much for being here. Just to kind of give everybody a little background on Michael, Michael Martinez is the founder of Fincasa Whiskey. Fincasa is a heritage blend of rye whiskey finished in origin rum barrels to share the stories of our ancestors, rooted in tradition and inspired by his family's history in Puerto Rican agriculture. Fincasa's rum barrel finished rye whiskey highlights the rich cultures of Latin America and the Caribbean. How's it going, Michael? Thank you so much for being here, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I know we were just kind of talking a little bit earlier that this has been months in the making.
Yeah.
I know when you first started this whole journey, I reached out to you and tried to connect. And as life is, we just got really busy. I got super busy with the business. You got super busy with the podcast, which has been going great. So I'm glad we're finally able to do this, and we're here knocking it out.
Yeah, exactly, man. It's been. I think you're one of the first people to hit me up the moment I posted up like my first few episodes, and I was like, "Oh, this is gonna be awesome," and then we just never got there. So I mean,
Yeah.
that's life, right? It's always like that. So, but I do appreciate it, man. So I guess to start off, let's let the world know you. Who is Michael Martinez?
Yeah, so I am I would guess second generation Puerto Rican from Long Island, New York. My father was born in Puerto Rico. I was born in Puerto Rico, and then we quickly moved back to New York. My mother's from New York, but she was Puerto Rican, and she couldn't deal with just living in El Campo of Puerto Rico, so we had to move back to New York, right? I grew up in Long Island, New York. Went to school there. Hofstra University alumni. Joined the Army. Still serving in the military, the Army Reserves. Work as a civilian in the Army, and currently today, started a passion project of mine of a whiskey business, which is Fincasa, and that's kind of like, I would say, the spark notes of my life. If I went individually each year by year, we'd be here forever. So.
Yeah, I got you. No, but I appreciate it, man. And like you said, you were born in Puerto Rico and then you came out here, but you said your mom didn't like living in El Campo.
No.
Can you explain what El Campo is? For your
for those that know, El Campo is just like kind of like, it's like the sticks. So for us in America, it's anything where there's almost nothing there, where maybe 9 out of 10 times your bathroom is an outhouse. You don't have hot water, and you're cooking maybe, if you're lucky, you have an electric stove, or if not, you're cooking with just fire. So in Puerto Rico, there's plenty of regions that we would consider El Campo, or, in different parts of Latin America, where it's just kind of like the woods, it's the farmland. It's you're not near a city at all. Your closest neighbor could be, maybe 5 minutes away, maybe 30 minutes away. And sometimes it takes a long, windy road to get to where you're going. And my mother, growing up in New York, that was quite the adjustment, going from suburbs to kind of the mountain life of Puerto Rico. And it just was not her flavor. And so after I was born, they moved back to New York, and that's where I grew up in Long Island.
Nice. Yeah, as someone who married a New Yorker and moved her to suburban wooded area of Houston, Texas for a few years, like I totally know that shocker. Yeah. When she'd look in the backyard and it's just dark and it's woods.
Yep.
Where'd you send me to? And why are there so many bugs? It's like, yeah. But is there, you talk about living in a campo, and I think one of the things you mentioned on your website too as well, and is that your family has a history of Puerto Rican agriculture. Is that why they were living in a campo?
Yeah, it's kind of, now the land, or where the area where the farm was, it's just a whole bunch of houses where it's just different, family members. It's kind of like one of those evolutionary things where it's like, okay, after a while, you go from farmland to sectioning off pieces of the land to give to family members so they could build houses. And the family farms, were mainly in the mountain areas of Guayama and Patillas in Puerto Rico. So that's like the southeast portion of Puerto Rico, just on the other side of the mountain from San Juan. And they had those farms from the early 1900s. I could date it back as late or as early as like the late 1800s. Before that, census stuff wasn't really popular. But we were able to identify exactly what the farms were, what they had, what they were producing, how many acres was it. So it's really cool to know that our our family's history was rooted in that agriculture and supporting Puerto Rico, and slowly has evolved to where we're able to live on the land that kind of gave back to us, right? So,
nice. And how long did you live in Puerto Rico?
oh man, I must have been a baby,
Okay.
barely a year. A true New Yorican
You're New
here.
York, yeah, for real, right?
Yeah,
'Cause
but
go ahead.
I go back frequently. I go back more often now, especially with the business, because
Mhm.
it's just nice to visit, and it's a beautiful place to be, especially outside the San Juan area. It's really cool to check out the mountain areas and find a jibaro, or you know go out in the campo and just see what life is like out there.
Mhm. Yeah, it's um I think for a lot of Latinos, it's a big part of our lives when we go back to our home country sometimes, or we go
Hmm.
visit family. Like I had my uncles too, who owned a chacra, a little farm in, you know, acres of mango trees and all these other farming and stuff like that. And we'd spend the day, and it's just like an outhouse with a hole, and they're cooking everything with wood fire,
Hmm.
and you're just spending the day. No electricity, no internet, no nothing, and it's just a whole different world. So, I think it impacts a lot of us. And so, obviously, maybe not much of a big impact from you moving to New York from that point, because
Hmm.
when you, but what was life in New York for you guys?
Yeah, we just kind of grew up really in the suburbs, which, if you're familiar with Long Island, it's probably um, by train, maybe about anywhere between 30 minutes, as far out east, up to an hour and a half east of the city. Um, you know, Depending on traffic, it could be anywhere from an hour to 2 hours to get to the city. So it's a lot more. It's not as city like, where there's just like apartment buildings, um, and a whole bunch of train systems. It's very suburban. There's a whole bunch of streets, houses, neighbors right next to you. So it was really cool to, I guess, experience that part of Long Island and that part of New York. And I think it was also interesting is because, like, the town I grew up in was fairly diverse in terms of minorities, between white, black, and Latino. And as I grew older, um, that Latino influence just continued to come in to the school and throughout my childhood. So as I got older, it almost felt like I was exposed to more Latino ethnicities and nationalities, and got to understand, there's a culture outside of just being Puerto Rican.
Mhm.
Because my frame of reference growing up was, as a 5-year-old, was, hey, the only thing that exists is a Puerto Rican, right? And it wasn't until I got older that I would learn that there's other nationalities across Latin America and Caribbean.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I'm not one to shy away from it, but I grew up very not liking being Latino for a long time, and I was very
Hmm.
into Black culture more than anything growing up. And it wasn't, I think, until I got to college, and actually joining, once again, for transparency, or one of my fraternity brothers, joining our
Hmm.
frat, where I ended up kind of getting more involved in learning about my culture and really embracing it or whatever. So, you talk about embracing the different culture. How has that impacted your life, and how has that, changed you?
Yeah, I think it's just kind of, being a Latino, like, it it's different, right? I don't want to, like, sit here and compare, but it is a different culture. But it's a lot of fun. It's something I grew up with, right? I grew up listening to merengue at the house, or bachata or salsa. Going to different like family parties and just experiencing that. So it was a big part of my childhood, and then growing up and being surrounded by other Latinos, it just felt very familiar to me. Um, and like I said, like probably in my elementary school, um, it was probably me and like one other kid that ended up being Dominican. I thought he was Puerto Rican also, but he's Dominican, right? It was just us, and then it was black people and white people, and I fell into the crowd with the black people, and then growing up, I was just like, oh, there's like a whole entire you know world of Latino people out there, and it was I embraced it. Middle school and into high school, joined the different Spanish clubs that we had, and then it eventually evolved into like going to college and join the fraternity. So it was something that I felt very familiar with, and I would guess I kind of used it as almost like, oh, hey, these are my people, right? Like if no matter where I go, I know I could always navigate to these group of Latinos, and there's always like these inside jokes that you would have and that you just understood being a Latino versus like if you were hanging out with your white friends or your African American friends. It's just like there's certain nuances that they didn't understand of my family style, and I didn't understand of theirs. But working or being with Latinos, like you just understood it, you got it.
Mhm. Yeah, it's like there's so many different cultures, countries, and backgrounds, and from everywhere. But there's still a very common thread amongst all of us that
Hmm.
you go to you go to one quinceañera, you go to one party. It's, it might be slight
Yeah,
differences, but you still get the same vibe, you still get the same love, and
yeah, yeah.
it's great. And so you
But
talked about college. Tell me a little about what is it, Hofstra?
yeah, Hofstra University. So I went to Hofstra University. My undergrad was in political science. I was pursuing minors in history and economics, and I think I was like a credit short, and I was just like, yeah, I'm not going to worry about that. So I never, I never graduated with a minor, but I got my degree. That's all that matters.
Mhm.
And while I was in at House University, I pledged Zeta Chapter 5 off a fraternity, and it was a really cool experience, and I really enjoyed being a part of a brotherhood of men that um, we had goals for ourselves, right? It wasn't just like we're here to party, here to be in a frat and get the most out of college. It was we all had our common goals, and we all had different goals, and it was almost like we would push each other to make sure that we've made our goals, and we held each other accountable. So growing up or experiencing that in college really allowed me to kind of become an adult and have expectations for myself and kind of hold myself accountable. And it also exposed me to when you're in a frat, you have to do events, you have to do certain things to kind of maintain a status of activity. So it required me to like kind of branch out and figure out things like, all right, well, we're running a banquet this year, what do we have to do? Event management, organizational structure, understanding, okay, hey, we gotta identify new interests, we gotta recruit. There's all these nuances that you don't really realize until you look at it years later. Like the joining the fraternity and the brotherhood allowed you to kind of have a stepping stone in business culture and setting expectations for yourself. So I think it really prepared me for life after college, but then it also allowed me to have this network
Mhm.
of those Latino men that I still talk to today, and we talk all the time about like, hey, what are our goals for this year? What are our expectations? And if one of us is not meeting that kind of standard or expectations that we have of ourselves, like we hold each other accountable. Like, hey, dude, like last year was not your year. Let's figure
That's
it
it.
out.
Yep. Yep.
Like, what do we have to do to kind of get you going again? Like, what's going on? Is everything okay? And it's a support system, right?
Mhm.
It's a wonderful support system. I still, we invite each other to our kids' birthday parties, baby showers, weddings. We have all these events. We do retreats every few years that we have the opportunity to. So it's been a great opportunity to experience that within the brotherhood. But outside of just the brotherhood and for college, I was in ROTC. I had joined the army after college, um, and primarily in the Army Reserves. Uh, Haas University is kind of like just a school in Long Island, nothing crazy. So yeah, that's kind of my college life, I guess.
Well, I mean, you bring up a good point, and it's very interesting. I mean, not that this is a recruitment video, but just being
Yeah.
part involved with like-minded individuals, and it's kind of why I wanted to create this podcast too, where it's like I want to get our voices and have people realize that there are other people with like-minded stuff that go through stuff and get success, and push and motivate and hopefully encourage each other. Your story, my story, anybody's story can help encourage us to move forward. And I think it's really important for us because you do go into college feeling like a small brown face in a white wave, and you're alone. You don't feel like other people
Hmm.
can relate. And when you do meet that group of people, whether it's through a fraternity or a sorority or a student group or something like that, that puts you around with other people like yourself that are motivated, that are looking to do stuff, and then graduate, and they continue to stay motivated and continue to help each other out. It's
Yeah.
just it's what they call all ship rise with the tide kind of deal.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
All ships rise with the tide, and I've heard that phrase plenty of times in different aspects of my life, but it really is like I view my college experience as being very fortunate. I understand, and recognize that my experience is probably not the same as everyone else's. And I think I'm very fortunate to have been able to be surrounded by professional organization where we have goals and we have expectations of ourselves. And I think the bonus is that we're predominantly Latino, and we see each other in our own faces, right? So it's really cool to be able to experience that. Um, and it's part of, as just like this podcast, like how do you say success in Spanglish? It's that's part of it, right?
Mhm.
Surrounding yourselves with a group of Latino, Latina, men and women that where we all have a goal of being successful.
Mhm. Yep, exactly. And so you talk about joining the army. Did you know you were going to join the army while you were in college, or was it kind of like maybe?
Yeah, so this is a funny story. Well, I think it's comical to me, but so I had joined the army after um, my sophomore year of college because I couldn't pay for school. Um, it got to the point of where my loans were getting denied, and I did not have an opportunity. Like I didn't have elsewhere to go. My first 2 years, I took out whatever loans they were going to give me between federal loans and private loans, which those private loans sucked.
Yeah,
Uh,
they still suck, by the way.
yeah,
20 years
yeah,
later, they still
yeah,
suck.
yeah. So I was kind of like at a crossroads of like, well, what am I going to do? Because um, completing college was important, right? It was a thing that I had to. That was kind of like an expectation of me, and I was like, all right, well, I got to finish it. I'm already 2 years in deep. I'm already in this much debt. Like, if I don't seek to finish this, I've almost like did this for nothing.
Mhm.
So I've always saw those commercials like, hey, join the army, we'll pay for school. And I was that guy. I was like, well, you know what? I'm gonna do it. Let's
Mhm.
let's go ahead. I had zero issues with the military or joining the military. I never considered it. And I was like, yeah, maybe this would be a cool opportunity for me to have my school get paid for while also maybe have opportunities to travel.
Mhm.
That'll be really cool to like just kind of travel and see the world. So I had enlisted first into the army, and to for those that are unfamiliar with how the army works, it's almost like there's a separation between enlisted soldiers and then officers. And pretty much the way I explain it, enlisted soldiers are like the workers, right? They are out there. They're the worker bees. They're doing everything to make sure everything runs. The officers, they're like the supervisors and managers and planners, right? They're creating plans and supervising the worker bees. So um, you know, both sides have their purpose. Most people that join the military are enlisted. You don't need a college degree to enlist, but there is a secondary route where you can go to school, earn your degree, and then become an officer. Or you can, if you already have your degree, you go into the military as an officer. There, that route exists. But again, in my ignorance of how the military worked and and how I could get the school paid for, I just immediately walked into a recruiter's office and I said, "Hey, I got to pay for school. Um, what do I have to do?" And he's like, "All right, we'll take this test and sign here." And that's essentially like what I did, right? I just signed I was like, "All right, cool, like let's do it." Um, so I had enlisted, and then when I was in boot camp, um, I was talking to one of my drill sergeants, and he kind of just pulled me over to the side. He's like, "Hey, listen, man, I know you're going to college and you ended up here." He's like, "Why the hell are you here? Why didn't you do like ROTC or something?" I was like, "What's ROTC?" he's like, like right, deer in the headlights moment. I'm just like, "What are you talking about, man?"
Mhm.
And then he explained to me. He's like, "All right, this is what ROTC is. Um, this is how it works. They pay for you to go to school. They pay for your school. They give you a stipend for your books." And he just broke everything down to me. So I was like, "All right, so I need to figure out how do I, after I leave here, go to do that, right?" So I put all my effort into researching it after I had finished boot camp, because I went to a secondary school, which is advanced individual training, which is like where you kind of train for your job. So I get there, I do my research, I contact. So my school that I was going to, House University, has an ROTC department.
Mhm.
I reached out to them. I said, "Hey, this is my situation." They said, "All right, once you're done, come here, and we'll figure out what we can do for you."
Yeah.
Literally the day I get back to New York, like I get off the plane, I see my family. The very next morning, I go straight to the ROTC department with and in the military, they hand you like these thick folders with all of your admin data, like everything, every paperwork that they have for you is in this thick folder.
Mhm.
So I take that thick folder, I bring it to the ROTC department, I put it on their desk. I'm like, "What can you guys do for me?" And luckily, I was able to. I was given the opportunity to, they gave me a scholarship um, for the rest of my school. And including that scholarship were stipends, and then at the end of it, I would, commission into the Army Reserves. Um, and then that was that day where I had joined and went to boot camp was 14 years ago. So so it's, I kind of view it again. I was very fortunate in that someone that was kind of looking out for me and was like, "Hey, here's a route that you could take. Here's the opportunity." And I took advantage of that opportunity. Um, I was able to pay for half of my school through the Army scholarship, and it worked out really great. But for those people that, if you're listening to this video and you're looking to enlist, do your research, because it's not an automatic "we'll pay for your school." There's very specific schools that they pay for, and specific routes that you have to go through to have school paid for. So my ignorance kind of led me into this weird, windy path to get school paid for, and that's ultimately why I joined the Army. Um, but I don't regret it. It led me into a career within the Army, and I'm very, very grateful and thankful for having going through the long way around.
Yeah, I mean, it's you don't know what you don't know kind of deal.
Yeah,
For a lot of us, I think we end up in a situation where it's like, "Oh shit, I gotta pay for this," either before
yeah,
or even like after. I mean, when I graduated too, I was like, "Damn, I'm gonna have to lose some weight because I might have to try to join the military to help pay for my
um,
school because I was, getting a job, even a decent paying job in the early 2000s was hard, with the recession
yeah.
and everything. So." So yeah, no, I mean, I think we've all kind of been there. Like, oh shit, how am I going to pay for this? This is a lot more
Yeah.
expensive than I thought it was going to be. So, well, at least I'm glad it worked out for you. And you did mention that you had kind of a career in the military. Is that what you started doing once you graduated?
Yeah. So after I had graduated, I ended up getting connected with someone um, that their mother was a vice president of a government contracting company, and so after our military school, that's how I met this person. They're like, hey, if you want to work for the company, you give my mother your resumes, and that's one of those lessons about it's about who you know, not what you
But
know
yeah.
sometimes.
Hmm.
So again, I was very thankful that um, I was able to be connected with someone that again was looking out for me and was like, hey, here's an opportunity. You know, I take that opportunity and I kind of just run with it. So that kind of got my foot into the government. And then, all the way in today, that was almost 10 years ago. And up until today, I'm a civilian for the Department of the Army, just doing admin stuff. So it was grateful to have that opportunity, but to also like seize that opportunity and kind of make sure, hey, like I want to stick around this because it lent out to a really good career.
Nice. And so I think we've all kind of been in a situation where we're sitting around with our buddies having a beer, having a drink, and we're like, oh shit, we should open a bar, or we should start a brewery. So
Uh,
so when did that all start turning for you? When did these conversations start happening for you?
yeah. So the whole whiskey thing, um, I kind of tell people it's my quarter life crisis, right? Where at the point of which I kind of had the idea, I was like about 8 years into my career as a civilian, and sometimes it just feels stagnant. It's like, all right, well, what's really next? I'm gonna come into the office every single day and do what I have to do, come home. Not complaining that it's a bad lifestyle, but sometimes I think the expectation or expectations I have for myself is like, all right, well, I have to go do something and do it to the fullest, and where is my reward at the end of it, right? What is you know how do I find personal joy or personal ambition in what I'm doing? And not saying that my job supporting the army does not give me personal joy, but sometimes there's no ambition in it. It's an office job, and the moment that I really had the idea of like a whiskey is when I heard one of my coworkers kind of like, oh hey, I'm gonna go retire in Puerto Rico, and he's just like some random dude. His wife is Puerto Rican, but he's not Puerto Rican. And then just for me, I was just like, what do you mean you have zero ties to Puerto Rico, right? Like you're just gonna go there? Like that makes no like to me at that time it made no sense. I was like, you're crazy. And then that's when it kind of like clicked in my head, like, well, what am I doing
Hmm.
to 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 get back to Puerto Rico or to give back to Puerto Rico and our culture? I'm just sitting here in this mundane job, and it's like, well, what are you doing? Looking at myself in the mirror, like, what are you doing? Um, so then, so then I started thinking like, well, what could I do? And then that's where I just start having like these random ideas, crazy ideas. And at that time, I had just built a bar in my basement. So like literally, I'm just like staring at the wall. I'm like, well, what if you just do whiskey,
Hmm.
right? Like, is that even a like? Is that even a thing? Does Puerto Rican whiskey exist? Does a Puerto Rican whiskey brand even exist? Right? I started asking myself these questions, and I'm just like, all right, well, if it doesn't exist, how do I make it happen? So then I just kind of spiraled into this like thought of or question to myself of like, all right, well, how does Puerto Rican whiskey, or why doesn't it exist, right? Because we know about rum,
Hmm.
plenty of Puerto Rican rums. So it was just like, all right, well, why isn't there a whiskey company? All right. And just learning that, it's probably 5 times as much to make whiskey in Puerto Rico than it is rum. And by the way, rum gets certain tax incentives because it's an agricultural product of Puerto Rico.
Hmm.
So like there's a disadvantage already, and you know, um, or making whiskey in Puerto Rico uh, at a business perspective does not really make sense. And then again, with the question of whiskey, I was just like, all right. And I kept focusing on whiskey because I'm like we as Latinos, we're whiskey drinkers,
Yeah.
right? We drink our Johnny Walker, we drink our Buchanan's, right? We drink Dewar's, like, right? It's everywhere. But again, I kept coming, some of these questions I kept coming back on is like, well, what are we doing for ourselves? Like, why isn't there a whiskey company that represents us and represents our culture, our heritage? There's these whiskey brands that are selling to our people, advertising to Latin America and the Caribbean, but they're not really telling our stories. They're not reflective of our lifestyle, other than that that we drink whiskey and they provide it to us, right? So then I kind of was like, all right, well, if I'm gonna do this whiskey thing, I have to really understand and learn about whiskey. So that I went on this whole entire rabbit hole for like an entire year. And thankfully, that year that I went to this rabbit hole of learning about whiskey was the pandemic. So
it's a good time to start learning.
So I literally was just buying like different types of whiskey bottles and just learning everything about the process from the very beginning of selecting your grain that you can use for whiskey, all the way up to distilling, to the barrel aging, to maturation, barrel finishing, like every aspect that you could possibly learn. I just put myself to learn about it and to really understand it. And at the same time, going back to that question of like, well, what are you doing about, for Puerto Rico? It's like, all right, well, how can I tie this to our culture? How can I tie this to our heritage and family history? And that's where I kept just kind of, playing with ideas of like, all right, well, what could it be? What is my end state? What is my goal for this whiskey brand? Not just to have representation, but, to tell the stories of our culture and our heritage through the bottle. Have it be representative of someone where you could pick up the bottle and say, hey, yeah, I could see myself in this bottle, or I could see myself in the pictures or the cocktails that we make, right? There's some sort of representation there. So, had the question, started drilling down, learning about everything, and then just kind of took that deep dive into it and just, said, all right, well, we're going to throw the dart at the wall and hopefully it sticks. And, I'm very thankful that, we starting bottling in October, our first batch netted us around 800 bottles. We have less than 300 bottles left available. So it's been a very great, first few months. And now we're starting to look at bottling our next few batches. And it's just kind of this whole repetitive process of buying more whiskey, putting them in rum barrels, and then waiting for them to finish for about 6 months to a year, and then bottling, and then kind of repeating that process over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned that, because that was actually going to be one of my questions. Like, growing up, you'd go to the parties and, the old men come out and that Johnny Walker Red comes out and, they open it and you just walk in and all the men are holding their little Johnny Walker. And whiskey is such a big part of the like Latino culture. And we don't get involved. I mean, granted, history of whiskey, it's very dominated up there in Europe, but, yeah, why not? And I think that's a very important question. I'm glad, it was a question you're asking, something that's motivated you, because, I agree. I think there is opportunity there for us to kind of get involved with it. So, and so can I explain what does Fincasa mean?
Yeah, so Fincasa, it's we just took two words, smashed it together. Finca meaning farm, and casa meaning house, right? Mm-hmm. It's our farmhouse, or where a home is. Home is where the heart is, but it's also like where our farmland is, and agriculture. And the name Fincasa really came about when I started this whole process of understanding about whiskey and what I want to give back. It was also like a moment of self-reflection of like who am I, right? Like, I know I'm Puerto Rican, but like I know my parents, I know my grandparents, but like what else, right? And I feel like us as Latinos, we do a really bad job passing on the stories of our prior generations, right? Like sometimes like our family members just don't even want to talk about it,
Mhm.
right? It's just like, oh, like I came here for my country. I worked so hard for you, and this is where we are today. Like, be thankful, right?
Mhm.
And it's just like, and like, but we don't talk about like what happened in between,
Mhm.
right? So I kind of wanted to do that for myself. It's like, all right, well, let me understand my, my culture, or my heritage a little better. I did the whole DNA ancestry thing. Um, and what was cool about ancestry was like you're able to like build a family tree, and because Puerto Rico is a commonwealth of the United States, there's a lot of documents up until like around like 1880 is like that time frame of reference where we still have a lot of documents and censuses, that we could just find online, and it's pre-translated. So I was able to like really build out my family tree, on certain aspects, like going all the way back to Spain, and then other aspects, just kind of just seeing this mixture of just like of indigenous people and Spanish people, and just like kind of like just the Jibaros in Puerto Rico, just like starting these families, and having these farmlands. And so like that's where I kind of really understood like, oh, like my family came from farming in
Mhm.
Puerto Rico. Like we have all these documents and this that say, hey, this is the farmland, this is the exact area in Guayama or Patillas, right? And this is exactly what they had. They had corn, they had sugar cane, coffee, they had cows, they had mango trees, like all of these different aspects of like when you go back to like when I go back to Puerto Rico, or when you go back to your country, you know, you experience that. You experience the fresh coffee, you experience, fresh mangoes, you experience all these things. So for me, it was like that's when I started really feeling connected and saying, oh, okay, this is what my family's about. This is what that heritage and history is about. So in creating a whiskey brand, I wanted to make sure that not only did it represent me, but it represented all other Latinos, um, in the Caribbean, Latin America, and I felt like agriculture and farming is a cornerstone of what we do, and whether it's back in your home country where your family owns farms, or you're coming over into America to work on farms, right? We This is kind of like a cornerstone pillar of our identity, and taking those fresh ingredients from the farm and putting it and cooking it with in our foods. So I wanted to make sure that story and that branding is what represented our company of Fincasa, again, Finca and house. And so that's kind of where Fincasa came from. And a lot of the design elements on the bottle itself is that story of my family having farms in Puerto Rico. The back part of the label is a replica of the agricultural census that we were able to find, and we were able to put all information about the whiskeys on there, and we're also able to kind of pay homage to my great grandfather's farm and put his farm number that he had on the census. So that number's back on the back label. Then on the front side of the label, we have like just like this picture of a drawing of mountains and like a farmland and a house. Because for me, like I know most people when they talk about Puerto Rico, they think about the beaches and like all the fun, but like there's this whole amazing culture in the mountains of Puerto Rico that if whenever you go, I always emphasize to people that talking about visiting Puerto Rico, I'm like, oh, you have to go to Guavate to get lechon. You have to go to
Mhm.
Casa Vieja in the mountains and just look over through the window and just see the valley of the mountain range. Like there's such a rich culture that exists in the mountains, and that's part of the story I wanted to tell and emphasize is like hey, there's still people today in Puerto Rico farming and giving coffee, making coffee companies. There that still exists, and I want to emphasize that on the bottle. And then we also have elements of like cigars and tobacco. So on the front label, we have a replica of like a cigar box label
Mhm.
that's on the front, and then on the top of the cork, there's a cigar ring, right? And my grandmother, when she was a little girl, she grew up on her father's cigar, or I guess tobacco farm. So it would be my great grandfather's farm, and she used to sew the tobacco leaves into the warehouse when she was a little girl to dry, so the tobacco leaves would dry. And then her father would either roll cigars or sell the tobacco leaves to other farmers. And my great grandfather, he smoked a cigar every day of his life until he was 92 years old.
Wow.
And I remember, and if you talk to Puerto Ricans, like they have the same sentiment of this type of, like, this
Mhm.
story is that, like, I remember being a little boy and walking into his house, and then all you smell is cigar smoke.
Mhm.
You just smell it. And when I went to Puerto Rico last October, um I just went around with the bottle and just was talking to people, and you could see in their faces like that they felt connected to the bottle. And when I talk to Latinos, it's like they feel that sentiment, and they're like, yeah, I remember my family that had a farm in my country, and or oh yeah, I remember when my grandfather, he used to smoke cigars, and I remember that smell. And it's just that nostalgia feeling
Mhm.
of old school. We're just hanging out, having a drink. um and that's why, that's why it's Fincasa, and it's representing our culture and heritage. And that's why we always emphasize culture, heritage, and family, right?
Mhm.
It represents that, for Latin America and the Caribbean.
And it's funny because my wife's also Puerto Rican, and when she talks about, she's from Juncos, and
Okay.
so when she talks about Puerto Rico, she doesn't talk about the beach. She talks about the mountains and
Hmm.
the farmland, the agriculture, and she gets pissed off at how much it's changed. And she's like, "It used to be
Yeah.
all farming, now they have all these buildings and all these stores." And
Yeah.
she's like, she misses it. So yeah, no, I think agriculture has a big part in, especially in Puerto Rico. And we went to Puerto Rico in November too. So it's my first time going there. We went to the mountains. We ate in the mountains. We went to the rainforest. It's such a
Yeah.
beautiful place, man. So I'm glad you're putting that love in your business. So, but obviously, starting a whiskey company isn't easy. Starting any company isn't easy. So what were some
Yeah.
of the challenges in starting a whiskey company?
Yeah. I think so there's a few, I would say, chapters of challenges,
Hmm.
right? Um, so one chapter of challenges that I experienced was, just getting my foot into the door, right? It's where do you even start, right?
Hmm.
A lot of whiskey brands, or whiskey companies, are developed through prior people that have, like, prior family members. Like, it's a
Heritage.
thing that's, yeah, it's a thing that's passed down. It's like, oh, okay, I learned how to distill from my grandfather and my father, and we used to do moonshine, and that's why I'm making a whiskey today, right? It's usually passed down, or you just pay someone a lot of money to consult for you.
And they
um
find a distillery.
yeah, you have a whiskey, right? Which I had neither. I did
Hmm.
not have anyone, to teach me how to make whiskey, um, or I didn't have enough money um, to pay someone to be a consultant for me. And no one's out here giving free chicken away,
Yeah.
right? It's everything has a cost. So I really had to figure out a lot of things by myself. Um, I had enrolled into distilled spirits business certificate through the University of Louisville, and a lot of that kind of taught me some of the business aspects of what I would have to deal with, um, in terms of the legal side of whiskey, because it's a whole different world.
so,
It's
so
not just like
so there's
you can't.
classes you could take to learn how to get into
Yeah,
that's awesome. Is that
absolutely. Yeah, there's a few classes, and there's a few, universities, as well as companies that you pay, and they kind of teach you. Um, so I self enrolled in some of those opportunities, in those classes, just to learn. And there's one thing about starting a business, right? Like, you could start a business. There's certain rules. It's a whole nother world in whiskey. Like because it's a controlled substance, like not a controlled substance, but like because like you have to be 21 or older to buy it. You can't just sell it from your house. Like there's all of these different nuances and laws, and then oh by the way, each state that you deal with has a different way of how they operate, right? Some states have control, where the state owns the liquor store. Other states, it's kind of a free market. So you're always kind of having to navigate yourself through all of these legal um, um, differences amongst the different states. So I self enrolled. Uh, uh, I got connected. I also got connected with a friend of mine that owns an importing company where he imported mezcal and soltol from Mexico. So I kind of helped him doing some operational stuff, and I'm very thankful for him allowing me to kind of like almost like a paid internship kind of thing. And because it gave me the opportunity to really learn about those legal nuances about, how do you import, how do you warehouse, where do you warehouse, the type of how to submit for certain applications, how to process a purchase order through a distributor, how to find a distributor, right? There's all these like little tiny steps. Most people just walk into the liquor store and pick up a bottle, but you don't really understand how much work or paperwork requires for you to just walk into that one store just to pick up the bottle.
Mm-hmm.
You had to apply for licenses. You had to, your each label has to go through a review process where the government has to approve your label before you could sell it. And that's not even speaking on the portions of um, getting my whiskey to Miami, Florida, where we do our barrel finishing, getting the rum barrels and doing all that. Like that's a whole nother piece of coordination that I had to take, responsibility of before it even gets to your hands or in the door. So that first challenge or chapter of challenges is really the
Mm-hmm.
legal and the nuances and the compliance part of starting a whiskey brand or whiskey company. Uh, the second chapter that I would I want to highlight is is Puerto Rico government,
Mm-hmm.
Puerto Rican government. Um, Again, my ignorance kind of leaves me to these windy roads where I've taken the long road instead of the short road. And kind of going back to that question where I had like, what am I doing for Puerto Rico? I was like, all right, well, my first idea and concept is to have a whiskey brand in Puerto Rico. I'm going to bottle in Puerto Rico. I'm going to send barrels down there. I'm going to do it all in Puerto Rico. And um, I opened up, I got a business license in Puerto Rico. I got my business bank account in Puerto Rico, and then I started the process. And um, it was just it was it's not impossible. It's just the way that the Puerto Rican government works. It's very different than
Mm-hmm.
governments in the U.S., where you almost have to be there full time in Puerto Rico to actually make it happen, because you have to go in person um, to La Hacienda and talk to the tax representative. You have to go to the your local pueblo's government to get this certificate of business. They have to do an inspection of the location of the business, which was my late grandmother's house. Right? It's
Mm-hmm.
just like like I'm just putting an address onto the application. They're like, okay, well, when can we visit the site? And do you have parking spaces? I'm like, parking spaces? What do you mean I need to have parking space? Right. So it's all these like layers of bureaucracy that I was just unfamiliar with. And it was time consuming. I didn't have, I don't have the luxury of just going to Puerto Rico and staying there for a few months to figure it out. So I knew at that moment, like, after this is like my third or fourth time within a year going to Puerto Rico, trying to get these like small steps moving forward. I take one step forward and then it felt like I was taking three steps back. Um, and a lot of it is just that's just how they do business there,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's a different. So my expectations were completely different, and I had to really make that decision of like, well, at this moment, I cannot open a barrel house or a distillery in Puerto Rico, that's going to have to wait. But I need to make the moves now to make sure that I could still launch a whiskey brand.
Mhm.
So then I had pivoted to finding a what we call a co-packer in the US. And a co-packer is someone that kind of handles everything for you, where you send them the barrels, they'll do the aging. It's usually like you're partnering with a distillery, so they'll take care of everything. You put your label on it, and then once it leaves the distillery, you're responsible for making sure the sales happen, making sure it goes to a warehouse that has the proper licensing to house the alcohol. So you're responsible for that. So I was fortunate enough that a distillery in Miami, Florida, Big Cypress Distillery, which is also a Latino-owned distillery. They make rum. They do some barrel blends for whiskey. They have an amazing gin. He was very willing to help me make my goal of like, all right, having this. He heard my story and was like, hey, you have a really unique product idea. Um, like I'm willing to help you out. Like let's figure out what we have to do. Just tell me when you want to send barrels here and what rum barrels you want to take care of, and and the transaction is that I pay him for housing. I pay him for bottling. So each bottle, there's a cost for him to bottle per bottle. Any labor that he's taking care of, he's taking care of it, and I'm paying him for it. And it really helped me out because now I didn't have to, go out and find my own warehouse or get my own equipment or do all these other licensing things, where it would have been more difficult for me because I didn't have that capital to do that. So I was very fortunate of Big Cypress Distillery for helping me out with that. And that's where we bottle and we do our barrel aging for the rum barrel finish.
Nice. Yeah, I think it was December, and I met someone who gets their their beer um,
Mm-hmm.
canned in a similar fashion, where they came up with the recipe or they came up with the thing, and then they reached out to an actual brewery that brews it and cans it for them, and
Yeah.
like that. So I was like, that's pretty awesome, and I think it gives an opportunity for the small guy to get their foot in the door before
Mm-hmm.
that barrier to entry can be really difficult, especially with the amount of whiskeys and liquors that are out there. So yeah, I'm glad that's something that you were able to find. It's so unfortunate you had to find it the hard way as
Yeah. No,
usual.
it's I like to take these long, windy roads to just to get from one point to another.
No, yeah, yeah. So is that a Puerto Rican thing? I don't know.
I think it is.
Yeah. No, no, but that's awesome, man. Well, what's it called? One of the other questions I had too, because you were talking about, um, it was very interesting to me because it was kind of one of the reasons I started this podcast was I got into this book, Shoe Dog, and it's about the guy who started Nike,
Hmm.
and one of the big parts that really it's supposed to be it's really influential. It's a really good underdog story about a company. But the early stages of it is a guy, and when he finally decides he's ready to do something, and he decides to do a shoe company. It's his father who was had connections with someone who had connections in Japan, who had connections with a
Hmm.
shoe factory that was able to get him that starting conversation. So imagine uh, uh, um, tomorrow you want to start a shoe company and you already have someone who knows someone that gets you in that
Yeah.
door. And I'm like, that's not us. That's not me. My dad's a truck driver.
Yeah.
We're undocumented immigrants. You know what I mean? Like, I can't go to my dad and say, I want to start this company. And he's like, yeah, I got a connection in
Yeah.
Europe to do that. So sometimes we have to do it the hard way. We have to be the
Hmm.
trailblazers. And so, presenting your story hopefully can help someone else know, take some time and research Puerto Rico before you start deciding to
Yeah.
start a company out there or
Hmm.
something like that. So, and so is there for coming up with your recipes and coming with things, is it you having to do a lot of experimenting on which barrel to use, what type of whiskey, or how it gets
Yeah.
distilled?
Yeah. So when thinking about this idea or concept, I understood there were certain limitations that I would never be able to overcome. One being distilling fresh, what we call new make, right, unaged whiskey. barreling it and waiting 4 or 5 years before I could actually use it in a product, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's that. One, I don't have the time and resources to do that, and two, that's an investment of you spending a lot of money that you're not going to see a return on for another 5 or 6 years. And by the way, you can't just do it that 1 year because you have to have continuous product. You have to do it every year after that, and you have to always be able to like you're forward projecting your future potential business sales off of nothing,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's nothing to say, oh, okay, hey, well, this year I'm going to lay down 100 barrels. Next year I'm going to do 200 because I know my whiskey will be great and I'm going to sell that much volume. And the next year, there's a real risk with whiskey that once you hit that mark, it tastes like shit, right? And it's a realization where like you have to be willing to take that risk. So I think a lot of people in the whiskey industry, there's certain risks that some people aren't willing to take. Like myself, I'm just like not going to sit here and pretend that like I'm going to be able to on my first time around make the world's greatest whiskey and do all this cool stuff. So knowing that limitation, um, I want to take a specific route in how I was going to enter the market. And the route I wanted to take was buying what we call sourced whiskey. So there's a few companies out there that they produce hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of gallons of whiskey, and they age it per year. And there's a whole business model behind doing this. And then once it's aged, you sell it to people like myself that want to buy it. So there's plenty of whiskey brands out there on the shelves that like myself, where we do not own a distillery. I personally have zero plans to ever own a distillery. I want to take high quality whiskey product and then put my own spin on it, which is doing the rum barrel finish. So I purchase, the quality rye whiskey. So when we're talking about whiskey, there's a whole bunch of different categories that exist, right? There's single malt, there's bourbon, there's rye whiskey, and those categories are the type of grain or the predominant grain that is used to make that whiskey. So a lot of single malts you use malted barley. Um, Bourbon is predominantly corn, and then rye whiskey is predominantly using the rye grain. So what rye does, it lends a has more green and earthy notes, but it also has this unique spice. So if you ever have like rye bread, like there's this kind of like there's like subtle hints of spice inside of that rye bread that you have, and it's the same with the rye whiskey. So the rye whiskey has this unique spice to it, and but it just doesn't stop there. It's like, all right, well, how do I take this rye whiskey and put my own spin on it while also um, paying homage to my culture in Puerto Rico and the heritage, right? Always going back to that cornerstone. Um, we have a rich rum history in Puerto Rico. So so the concept was, okay, we're going to take rye whiskey and then we're going to take rum barrels. We're going to take the whiskey liquid, put them in old rum barrels, and it's going to impart the sweetness from the rum, but not to a point where it's overpowering, right? You're not mixing rum into whiskey. You're getting these subtle nuances of the rum infused into the rye whiskey. And so that's where it's kind of like, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is going to be our process. So we take that, we buy high quality rye whiskey, we send it down to Miami, Florida. We work with different barrel brokers to give us the different rum barrels that are available on the market. And we're being very selective on which barrels we're purchasing, and then we're sending them down to Miami so the rye whiskey could finish. And there's a few things I want to highlight about this. One, we do this in Miami because the climate in Miami is the closest to the Caribbean that you can get to where it's high heat, high humidity, and that has an effect on the barrel and the whiskey that's aging in the rum barrels. And we wanted to make sure we had that effect of high heat, high humidity when we're doing our aging process. When we select our rum barrels, so we are considered a small batch whiskey. We only bottle 4 barrels at a time. And with those 4 barrels, I know earlier we had talked about origin rum barrels.
Mhm.
So origin rum barrels is kind of like a term that our company or my company has coined as being us using rum barrels from one specific country. So each batch is going to highlight a rum from only one country. The first batch we highlighted Barbados rum barrels. Later this year, we're gonna have a Puerto Rican rum barrel batch, another Barbados rum barrel batch, and then a local Miami rum barrel batch. And the idea and concept is that each of our countries, from Puerto Rico to Barbados, Jamaica, El Salvador, Venezuela, like all of our countries that have these rum producers, they do it differently.
Mhm.
We have a different climate, right? Jamaican rum is very funky. Puerto Rican rum is very sweet, right? So how can we represent those countries through our whiskey and our rum barrel finish process? And by highlighting only one country's rum barrels per batch, our consumers are able to see and recognize the differences between the rums, because when you taste it in our whiskey, you're going to see, oh, okay, hey, this one is a little more funky, or this one's a little more, I get a lot more banana notes from this rum distillery, right? And it's a very unique process to have, and it's a really cool thing to do. Is like, once you start collecting these bottles, right? You have your Barbados batch, Puerto Rican batch, and then hopefully we could collaborate with more countries. You'll have all of these different batches, and then you could kind of sip on it and say, oh, okay, I could tell this one is completely different than that one. Like, it's just like wine, right? You're
Mhm.
comparing the different grape regions. We're comparing the different rum regions through our rye whiskey. And we just kind of want to tell those, like, that's the story we want to tell with our, like, when you're sipping our whiskey, it's like, okay, hey, what does the Barbados, rum barrel finish taste like? What does the Puerto Rican one taste like? So it's always highlighting our origin rum barrels through that process.
Nice. And if the Puerto Rican one does not have a little do rag on the top, is it even Puerto
Yeah,
Rican? Like,
yeah. We're gonna. I've been playing around with the idea of like, what are we gonna do? Well, one of the things we're definitely gonna do is so on the bottle itself, and I have a bottle here. I probably can't see it that well. Is there's a stamp here. This stamp always changes per batch. So if it's a Barbados barrel, um, if it's a Puerto Rican barrel, it'll state what barrel and country it's coming from, and the color of the stamp will match the tamper tape label here. So for Barbados, we're using a purple stamp coloring. That way, when you have 6 or 8 bottles of Fincasa, you could tell which one. Okay, hey, that's the Puerto Rican one. Oh, that's the Barbados one. That's my favorite, right? So it gives you the opportunity to kind of see the differences, even if you're looking from afar. And our goal is to have a long enduring this is a passion project. It's this long enduring goal of like working with these different Caribbean and Latin American countries, and highlighting their rum, right? I explain to people that I'm not a whiskey maker. I'm more of a curator. I'm getting high quality rye whiskey and high quality rum, and I'm doing this unique finishing process and presenting it to you as the consumer.
That's awesome, man. And for people who are listening on the podcast, you're gonna have to go onto YouTube to see what he was talking about.
Yeah,
So,
or check out our
uh,
our Instagram or Facebook, whatever. I'm not yet on TikTok because I think I'm past the age group that uses TikTok.
don't sell yourself short, bro. Don't sell yourself
Yeah,
short.
yeah.
Well, I mean, that's awesome, man. And so, one of the things I do like to ask, when we get to near the end of our interviews is, if you could go back and give yourself some piece of advice to the younger version of yourself, what's something you'd tell yourself?
Yeah, I think the one piece of advice I would give myself is success looks different for each person. I think for the longest, growing up, I've had this concept of to be successful is to be rich, have a nice house and have the nice car, and you have this almost like Hollywood life that you're imagining of what success should be like. And sometimes especially in today's world where uh, you kind of can't always believe what's on the internet, but there's a lot of things happening on the internet. You fall into this weird hole of like, man, I'm not even successful yet compared to these like 19-year-old kids that have Lamborghinis, right? It's like, what, like, how are like it's just like you're just perplexed. But I think really emphasizing that success comes in different, you know, ways. It doesn't, you don't have to have the nice car, house, be a multimillionaire to be successful in your own right. You can be a small craft producer of or a painter, or whatever it is that you found purpose in is success in its own right. That people search decades to find, right? And it's not a race. It's not a race to be successful, because again, like it can take years for you to find that success. So that's that wisdom that I would impart on the younger version of myself, is that success is different for every person, and it's not a race.
Yeah, and that's the highlight of my show. It's everybody's success is different, and so I guess to kind of finish up, like, how do you say success in fame? What does success mean to you?
Yeah, so success for me um, is having the opportunity to give back um, to the culture that really uh, created me and molded me to who I am today, and making sure that our future generations remember and understand and know that our culture and heritage is everything. And I'm hoping to do that with Fincasa, is sharing those stories and making sure that our younger generations don't forget that we used to live in El Campo, and we used to cook with wood, and there's beauty and nostalgia. So really, even today, with the little that I'm doing and have the opportunity to share with Fincasa, I feel like I've succeeded to even if I change one person's life, to say, hey, like, I've recognized my own culture because I found this bottle and I heard your story, and it allowed me to recognize my own story. That's how I would, say success in Spanglish.
Nice, man. Awesome, man. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show today. And so tell me, how can people learn more about you and Fincasa?
Yeah, so feel free to reach out to us on Instagram and Facebook. Just look up Fincasa Whiskey. You can visit our website at www.fincasawhiskey.com. Check our Instagram if you're looking for to purchasing bottles online. We ship to over 40 states. Um, I'll be pushing out coupon codes here and there. So continue to follow us. If you're in Puerto Rico, we just landed a big distributor out there, so we're going to be, in a lot of the liquor stores out there. We have a pretty good presence in Washington D.C. area. Just continue to follow us. Stay up to date, and you'll find your Fincasa bottle soon.
Nice. Awesome, man. Well, I really appreciate it, and I wish you,
Yeah,
all the
thank
best
you.
of luck, man. And I'm hoping to get to see some of that creeping up in different stores around here. I don't go to liquor stores anymore, but I'll make sure to let people
Yeah,
know to look out. So yeah,
yeah. Thank you, brother. I appreciate it, and I'm glad after a few months we were able to do
yeah, I
this.
know, right? So
Yeah,
yeah, well, let's not wait too long to do it again. So
yeah. All
thanks,
right,
man.
brother.
I
We'll talk
appreciate it.
soon.
Yeah, take care.
All right.
Uh, and so, well, if everyone else, thanks so much for tuning in. I really appreciate you as always. And I hope you'll join me again next time as we continue to learn how to say success in Spanglish.